Today, resilience and redemption. Helen Keller versus the Incredible Hulk. Welcome back to Marvel America, the podcast where history meets heroism. Today's episode dives into the lives of Helen Keller, the extraordinary woman who overcame incredible adversity to become a beacon of hope in education. And the Incredible Hulk, a misunderstood genius whose struggles with inner turmoil resonate deeply with audiences. Both Keller and the Hulk teach us about resilience, the power of redemption, and finding strength in adversity. Let's go back to 1880. That's when Helen Keller was born in Tuscumbia, Alabama. At just 19-months old, she lost her sight and hearing due to illness. Her early years were filled with frustration and isolation, as you can imagine. But her life changed when her teacher, Anne Sullivan, entered the picture. Some historians speculate that Sullivan had too much influence over Helen Keller's writings and speeches over the years. More on that in a moment. She had a breakthrough in education. With Sullivan's help, Keller learned to communicate through sign language and later became the first deaf-blind person to earn a bachelor's degree. Keller was a tireless advocate for people with disabilities, a prolific author, and a public speaker. Her work with the American Foundation for the Blind helped improve the lives of countless individuals. Some critics, however, argue that the organization focused on assimilation into mainstream society rather than fully embracing the unique culture and identity of blind individuals. Keller also championed women's rights, labor rights, and peace. Her ability to transform personal challenges into opportunities to uplift others made her a symbol of human resilience and determination. Then there's the Hulk. Bruce Banner was a brilliant scientist exposed to gamma radiation, which transformed him into the Hulk. Some contest that it was his irresponsible scientific experiments that caused the transformation in the first place that raised ethical concerns. More on that in a bit too. While his intellect remains intact as Banner, his alter ego embodies uncontrollable rage and raw power. Banner's ongoing internal conflict between his rational self and the destructive Hulk mirrors humanity's struggle with emotions and impulses. His story is one of redemption and the pursuit of self-control. Despite being seen as a monster, the Hulk often becomes a hero, saving lives and using his powers for good when it matters most. Every individual has their strengths and their flaws. The same is true for heroes. Helen Keller had determination. She was an advocate for human rights. And she had an unyielding will to improve the world. There is some controversy surrounding Keller's legacy. For instance, she occasionally faced criticism for her political views, especially her support for socialism, which alienated some audiences. Keller was an outspoken socialist and a member of the Industrial Workers of the World, which advocated for workers' rights, wealth redistribution, and an end to capitalism. Keller also expressed interest in eugenics, though her stance was complex. She supported birth control and population control measures for people with disabilities, which raises ethical concerns today. While it can't be argued that Keller overcame significant challenges, some argue that her access to elite education and wealthy benefactors like Alexander Graham Bell and Mark Twain gave her opportunities that most deaf-blind individuals never had. Some critics go so far as to critique how her story is used as inspiration porn, where people with disabilities are portrayed as extraordinary solely for overcoming their condition, rather than being recognized for their broader achievements. And as I alluded to earlier, there's an ongoing debate about how much of Keller's work was truly her own versus being shaped, edited, or even ghost-written by her teachers like Anne Sullivan. Critics point to stylistic differences in her various writings, suggesting that later works may not have been entirely hers. Some in the deaf community feel that Keller did not do enough to advocate for deaf culture, sign language, and the preservation of deaf identity. She primarily communicated through spoken language and fingerspelling rather than promoting American Sign Language, otherwise known as ASL, which has led some to see her as reinforcing oralist perspectives rather than championing deaf culture. Despite these controversies, Helen Keller's advocacy for disability rights, education, and humanitarian causes remains a significant part of her legacy. Then there's the Hulk. We all know about his strengths: immense physical power, the ability to protect the vulnerable, and unwavering loyalty to his allies. His flaws, however, are going to be his unpredictability, struggles with anger management, and the fear of hurting those he loves. As I mentioned earlier, some critics argue that his reckless pursuit of knowledge endangered himself and others, mirroring real-world concerns about unchecked scientific ambition, nuclear weapons for existence, unethical human experience in general. In various adaptations, he continues to perform dangerous experiments on himself, which some see as reinforcing irresponsible scientific behavior. Then, of course, there's the collateral damage and accountability. As the Hulk, Banner destroys cities, we know that. He endangers lives and leaves massive destruction in his wake. Unlike other heroes, like Iron Man, Spider-Man, who actively try to minimize damage, Hulk often acts as an uncontrollable force of nature. In some comic book storylines, like World War Hulk or Planet Hulk, he attacks Earth and threatens millions, leading some to question, why the heck do the Avengers continue to trust him rather than neutralizing him as a threat? Banner's transformation into the Hulk is often linked to his repressed rage, which has sparked discussions about mental health representation. While some see Hulk as a metaphor for dealing with trauma and emotional regulation, others argue that his character reinforces negative stereotypes about people with anger issues or PTSD as inherently dangerous. For instance, the phrase, "you wouldn't like me when I'm angry," has been criticized for associating anger with destruction rather than addressing it in a constructive way. Let's take a closer look at that comic book storyline, World War Hulk. Bruce is exiled to a distant planet by the Illuminati, some of the members, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, and one of my favorites, Mr. Fantastic. Well, this leads him to seek revenge on Earth after his wife and child are killed. While fans sympathize with his loss, his return to Earth as a ruthless conqueror led many to question whether he had gone too far. Some see this arc as justified retribution, while others argue that Hulk became a full-blown villain during this period. And I'm curious, let me know in the comments what your take is on the MCU's portrayal of Smart Hulk in Avengers Endgame. Some fans love seeing Banner and the Hulk merge into one, balancing his brains and brawn. I, on the other hand, felt this undermined Hulk's core identity, making him less of a rage-driven force of nature and too comedic for my taste, losing that dramatic tension that defined the character. Alright, let's get back to Helen Keller, and it's time to burst the American bubble. This segment, of course, focuses on what the heck was going on in the rest of the world during Helen Keller's prime. In America, we often live in this bubble, and we forget that there's so much else going on. The early 1900s. From 1904 to 1905, you had Japan defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. This marked the first time an Asian power defeated a European empire in modern warfare. There was the Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1920. This major revolution against dictatorship and foreign influence led to significant social and political change. The first global war involving Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Africa and Asia, this reshaped geopolitics. And it is during this time, in 1917, that the Russian Revolution erupts. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, overthrow the Tsar, leading to the creation of the Soviet Union. And then following World War I, we've got the rise of fascism in Europe. Benito Mussolini took power in Italy in 1922, and then Adolf Hitler takes power in Germany in 1933. The Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939 was a brutal conflict between Republicans and nationalists, resulting in Francisco Franco's dictatorship. In the worldwide Great Depression from 1929 to 1939, economic collapse affected countries across Europe, Asia, and Latin America, not just the US, where it was kicked off. If we take a step and look back, Helen Keller's lifetime spanned a transformational era in world history, witnessing imperialism, 2 world wars, decolonization, and the rise of major global movements. Despite being an American, she engaged with some of these issues, supporting socialist ideals, advocating for pacifism, and even meeting with world leaders. The Incredible Hulk's debut came in 1962, a creation from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The Cold War era fears of nuclear power and scientific experimentation, of course, informed the creation of the Hulk, reflecting societal anxieties about tech and its consequences. Now let's talk about pop culture during Helen Keller's era. She was immortalized in The Miracle Worker play and the film. As we rolled into the 20th century, the silent film era came into play. Stars like Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Mary Pickford became major cultural icons. This was the birth of Hollywood. Filmmakers moved to Los Angeles to escape strict regulations in the East Coast film industry. All the patents by Thomas Edison made it tough for other filmmakers to do their art without being penalized. The jazz music explosion took off between the 1910s and the 1920s. It originated in New Orleans. Jazz became the defining sound of America, with legends like Louis Armstrong rising to fame. And of course, you can never downplay the huge impact of the Model T on the car culture. Henry Ford's affordable automobile changed American lifestyles and inspired a new love for road trips. After World War I, before the Depression, Helen Keller lived through the Roaring '20s. We had the flapper culture and the Jazz Age. Young women challenged norms with bobbed hair, short dresses, and rebellious attitudes. We had the speakeasies and the Prohibition from 1920 to 1933. The banning of alcohol led to underground clubs, bootlegging, and the rise of gangsters like Al Capone. Also in the Roaring '20s, we had the Harlem Renaissance, a flourishing of black culture expression in literature, music, and art, featuring figures like Langston Hughes and Duke Ellington. And before TV, we had the birth of the radio in the '20s. Radio became the main source of entertainment, broadcasting music, comedy, and news. In the first talkie film, The Jazz Singer, in 1927, this film revolutionized cinema by introducing synchronized sound. And of course, when the Depression hit in the '30s, we needed music to keep our spirits up. Swing music and big bands were all the rage. Benny Goodman, Count Basie, and Glenn Miller defined this era with upbeat jazz and dance music. And this was the golden age of Hollywood. Think about it. Films were the cheap form of entertainment. Instead of going to concerts and theaters, you'd catch a feel-good movie. Iconic films like Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz. These films set new storytelling standards. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of Marvel's biggest rivals, DC Comics. Superman debuts in 1938 in Action Comics #1. And it was during this Depression era that President Franklin D. Roosevelt initiated the New Deal's cultural programs. These government programs supported artists, writers, and filmmakers to document American life. There was the rise of radio dramas. Orson Welles' War of the Worlds in 1938 famously panicked listeners, providing the power of mass media. They actually thought the world was being invaded by aliens. Helen Keller witnessed some of the most transformative cultural shifts in American history, from vaudeville to Hollywood, jazz to rock and roll to radio and television. Despite being deaf and blind, Keller was highly engaged with the world and even met with Charlie Chaplin and other major cultural figures. Mark Twain, for instance, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Alexander Graham Bell. And let's not forget Hulk's impact on pop culture. From Lou Ferrigno's portrayal in the 1970s TV show to Mark Ruffalo's depiction in the MCU, he's known for the iconic lines, "Hulk smash," and his catchphrase, "Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." Looking forward to many more years of the Hulk on screen and in the comic books. You ready for the trivia challenge? If you don't know how it works, I'm going to give you 10 trivia questions. I'm going to read each question, I'm going to pause, and then after we go through them all, and you've thought about it, we're going to go through all 10 again, and I'll give you the answers. See how well you do. Let's go. At what age did Helen Keller lose her sight and hearing? What causes Bruce Banner to transform into the Hulk? Who was Keller's lifelong teacher and companion? Who is the Hulk's arch enemy, who was also created by gamma radiation? What was the title of Helen Keller's autobiography, published in 1903? We didn't mention this in the episode, of course, but if you know it, bonus. In the MCU, who triggers the Hulk's transformation back to Banner in the Avengers? I didn't specifically mention this in the episode either, but see if you can guess. Which famous inventor was instrumental in helping Helen Keller's education by introducing her to Anne Sullivan? In which famous comic book storyline does Hulk get exiled from Earth only to return seeking revenge? Do you know what color the Hulk originally was when he first appeared in The Incredible Hulk #1 in 1962? What is the name of Bruce Banner's cousin, who also gains Hulk-like powers? Alright, how'd you do? At what age did Helen Keller lose her sight and hearing? 19 months. What causes Bruce Banner to transform into the Hulk? Extreme emotional stress or anger. Who was Keller's lifelong teacher and companion? Anne Sullivan. Who is Hulk's arch enemy, also created by gamma radiation? The Abomination. What was the title of Helen Keller's autobiography, published in 1903? The Story of My Life. In the MCU, who triggers the Hulk's transformation back to Banner in the Avengers? That would be Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow. She sang him a lullaby. In which famous comic book storyline does Hulk get exiled from Earth only to return seeking revenge? World War Hulk. In what color was Hulk originally when he first appeared in The Incredible Hulk #1 in 1962? He was gray. What is the name of Bruce Banner's cousin, who also gains green-like powers? Jennifer Walters, attorney at law. You ready for a couple of thought-provoking Socratic questions? Here's your first. Helen Keller didn't just overcome her disabilities. She actively fought for socialism, women's rights, and civil liberties. If society saw you as less than, would you fight for systemic change, or would you focus on personal success? Why? You're Bruce Banner, the Hulk. The world sees the Hulk as a monster, but Bruce Banner as a genius. If society labeled you based on your worst qualities rather than your best, how would you prove them wrong? Have fun pondering those two questions. Resilience and redemption. These are the two themes we see in both Helen Keller's advocacy and the Hulk's struggle for control. How can you draw inspiration from their stories to overcome your own challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Join us next week for another captivating episode of Marvel America, where history meets heroism. I love you.